While playing Augusta in Whimpering Wastes, I noticed that this game mode really has come a long way since its release, and a lot of my beliefs from when Whimpering Wastes came out are simply outdated now, so I wanted to talk a bit about how much the game mode has changed. First of all, what has changed when it comes to the mechanics of Whimpering Wastes in general? Well, here the only thing that's really changed ever since the game mode came out is the addition of the Burning Waves buff to the Infinite Torrents mode as well, which essentially functions like grit value in Star Rail, where after killing enough enemies or doing enough damage or whatever, you get this mega buff that increases your damage output dramatically. So this does help when it comes to Whimpering Wastes. But honestly, compared to the last version of Whimpering Wastes where we did not have this buff, I haven't felt much of a difference. But outside of mechanics, what has changed? I think there's two big things people have noticed. One being the fact that tokens have become a lot more specific and haven't really been offering much universality, and then the second of all, enemies have become very chonky. And that second one is what in my opinion really makes the difference here. The sheer increase in enemy HP makes nuke-based characters like Augusta feel that much better within Whimpering Wastes, but it really hurts the characters who are being entirely carried by their sheer amount of consistency and AoE, like GN. So while this change has caused some characters to shine, it definitely has also caused the downfall of some others. Overall, I feel like this is a net negative for most accounts. After all, if enemies have more HP, that also means you're simply getting less kills, which means a lower score. This has caused a lot of people I know, and especially people I don't know, to become unable to clear Whimpering Wastes without putting in some heavy amount of effort, and that's what I believe really needs to change about the game mode at the current moment. To me, when Whimpering Waste was first introduced, it offered a very nice game mode to allow characters that have high AoE and consistent damage output, but not as high DPS to still shine. Whimpering Wastes was very clearly separated from Tower of Adversity by that, and I feel that it has lost a bit of that magic ever since the HP inflation began. But that aside, let's discuss how this changes what's really important for Whimpering Wastes. As I said before, what made you a strong character in Whimpering Wastes before was number 1, consistency, number 2, AoE. Those were the big things here. Simply having a lower damage output than a different character would be completely fine as long as you're still able to kill waves very quickly. But as I've said multiple times at this video, this is no longer the case. Your damage output on each individual attack matters way more now. So that sheer consistency and AoE is no longer enough. Sure, consistency and AoE are still very big parts of your performance within Whimpering Wastes, but your overall damage output has definitely skyrocketed to become one of the more popular and important things within Whimpering Wastes. It's why I believe Augusta to be a more powerful character than GN within the game at the moment. While she is not as consistent with her damage output, and while her AoE definitely isn't as blatant as that of GN, her sheer damage output being so much higher than that of GN makes her a stronger character within the mode. This is also why characters like Carlotta and Cardathea are still able to perform better than GN in my current opinion, because their damage outputs are simply higher while sacrificing some AoE and consistency to do it. I feel that something we see a lot within these DPS characters that have less consistent rotations is while their damage is not as evenly spread out throughout the rotation, their lowest points are still just as good as the consistency of the older characters like GN. GN, throughout the entire rotation, is doing the damage output of an Augusta during her weakest point. So while Augusta's damage output is less spread throughout her rotation, even at her weakest, she's still doing what GN is doing the entire time. And that finally brings me to which units have been most heavily affected by the sheer amount of change WhiWa has gone through. First of all, I want to talk about the bar none, by far best DPS in Whimpering Wastes, and that has to be Thundah. This character is honestly kind of ridiculous within the game mode, and it's definitely become common belief at this point that Thundah has become the bar none best DPS who stands just one tier above everything else. Thundah is just so powerful in this game mode that even without her signature weapon and even without her best in slot teammates, she's still performing well. Remember, this is the character that sparked the entire discussion of our signature weapons becoming too powerful, and even without it, she's still standing one step above everyone else. Thundah within Whimpering Wastes is simply something else, and if you're struggling with the game mode and you don't care about who you're going to pull next, Thundah is definitely up on that list of being one of the best picks. Another team that I want to talk about is the Mono Fusion team, also getting some of the highest scores within Whimpering Wastes. Although you won't really see it in the current reset because both sides are fusion resistant, the Mono Fusion team is definitely still a force to be reckoned with, and should not be glossed over whenever we're talking about Whimpering Wastes and whatever the best teams are. But with those two out of the way, I want to talk a bit more about the teams that I feel have been heavily affected. Number 1 being GN. I've talked about him plenty of times already in the video, because he's simply a perfect example of how WuWa has changed. GN used to be an absolute slaughterhouse, just demolishing whatever came in his path, and things only got better once people realized that playing him with Thundah and using double GN rotation was actually more powerful than playing the standard hypercarry compositions with Mortefi. But the game has changed, and GN, with his lower damage output but very high consistency, is simply no longer able to keep up with the sheer amount of HP that enemies have been given. I'm not saying he's bad in the game mode, but he has simply severely fallen off ever since the game mode released, and he is no longer the giant that he was once respected to be within the game mode. Another character that seems to have been heavily affected is Phoebe. Phoebe is a character who in Whimpering Wastes primarily focused around using her nukes to one-shot a wave. Every single Forte Heavy would have been capable of one-shotting a wave of small mobs at the very least, and sometimes even elites. She also had her Liberation, which could easily nuke a wave of small mobs, and then her Ultra skill, which did consistent damage. But now, because enemy HP is raised, it's simply way harder for Phoebe to start one-shotting waves, so she's been affected quite severely by the HP increase within the game mode. I can't really call her a good DPS for Whimpering Wastes anymore with much confidence. Another character that has seen a big change is Camellia. While Camellia definitely is better off than some of the other characters I've mentioned in this segment, she did get heavily affected by the changes. Much like GN, Camellia is a very consistent character when it comes to her damage split throughout her rotation, but with one big difference. Actually 2 if you want to be pedantic. Number 1 is the fact that Camellia has access to a nuke to quickly dispatch of at least one wave of elites, something that GN is simply not able to do as fast. But the other thing is that Camellia's damage output is simply higher than that of GN, meaning that Camellia is capable of dealing with waves in a more efficient fashion than GN is able to. And thus, while she hasn't been affected as heavily by the changes as GN has, she definitely has still been affected. I don't think it's any sort of stretch to say that Camellia has been hurt quite severely by the changes that we've gotten recently. Zani, with her mechanics in Whimpering Waste, is pretty similar to Phoebe, in the way that while her damage output is indeed quite consistent throughout the rotation, it's primarily centered around mini nukes that are meant to wipe whole waves at once. Zani's damage output is definitely higher than that of Phoebe, but she's still suffering from the same problem. Zani's nuke has a much higher likelihood of actually one-shotting the enemy than Phoebe's Star Flash, so she's definitely a way better character than Phoebe when it comes to Whimpering Wastes, at least in the DPS role. But that doesn't change the fact that Zani has been severely affected by the same issues that plague Phoebe. Her less powerful slashes are now no longer as efficient at wiping waves as they were previously able to, so now you're really focusing most of your damage into those 2 Nightfalls, and it's very possible that you're wasting damage on waves if your smaller slashes are not capable of finishing off the wave. As for the rest of the characters, they fall into one big category, being I'm not a big fan of the HP inflation, but there's nothing specific in my kit that makes it hurt extra bad. These characters being Carlotta, Cardathea, DPS Brant, Jinshi, Xingliao, etc. These characters definitely were hurt by the changes by quite a significant amount, but I don't think that it has to do with any specific part in their kit. It's simply just, well, it takes longer to kill things now. You definitely could say that Carlotta is now in the same bracket as Zani and Phoebe when it comes to how their nukes interact with waves, where you don't want to waste your damage, and you need to make sure that you use your nuke on a whole new wave, but that is something that's very dependent on your investment, considering the fact that Carlotta's damage output is spread in a different way compared to Phoebe and Zani. But those are just my opinions on Whimpering Wastes. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description down below. If you would just want to see more of me as a person, be sure to check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. I primarily talk about PGR, but I kinda just make videos about whatever I feel like. But that'll be all from me. Peace.